Tens of thousands of Israeli protesters rallied in Jerusalem against a controversial judicial reform bill that now faces a key vote. This will be a showdown between the hardline religious nationalist coalition and swathes of Israeli society. The vote would mark the first major piece of legislation to be approved. Israelis calling for the proposed judicial overhaul to be scrapped lined city streets in Jerusalem carrying flags and beating drums. The police used water cannons to disperse the protesters.
כן, כן, אין לי, אנחנו לא מפחדים.
Thousands of protesters entering Jerusalem rallied near the parliament, the Supreme Court and the Prime Minister's residence. They arrived after a multi-day march that began in Tel Aviv earlier in the week. The protesters had marched for over 70 kilometers and had set up camps in the city. Meanwhile, the counter-protesters also gathered in Tel Aviv. They say opponents of the bill want to override the will of the majority that voted Netanyahu's government into power last year. And the battle has opened up deep divisions in Israeli society.
I'm here today to make it clear to the people that I've elected, to the people that I voted for, to the people that I support, that I am 100% in favor of this judicial reform. I think my country needs it. I think we absolutely need to go through with it. I think it would be a huge mistake to let anarchists who run absolute terror across our streets to win in this case, who are fully attempting a military coup. I think it would be a huge mistake to fall prey to that, and I really, really hope that they follow through with everything they've promised us they do.
As the protesters traveled to and from protest sites, an interesting visual from the Nevon station was posted by a member of the Knesset. Protesters going up the elevator heading to the pro-judicial reform protest shook hands with the protesters going down the escalator heading to the anti-judicial reform protest. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been discharged from the hospital where he underwent a successful pacemaker implant. He will now be attending the vote on the judicial bill in Parliament on Monday. The Benjamin Netanyahu-led government is potentially set to win the vote as it sits on a comfortable majority in the single-chamber Knesset. Netanyahu's government argues that the proposed reforms will prevent overreach by unelected judges and ensure a better balance of power. Critics say that removing the standard, which is already invoked only in rare cases, would allow the government to pass arbitrary decisions, make improper appointments or firings, and open the door to corruption. Demonstrations near the parliament are expected, and the coalition also faces the threat of a mass boycott of service duty by thousands of military reservists if the law passes. The US, a longtime ally of Israel, has also attempted to pressurize Netanyahu and his allies to halt its plans to overhaul the country's judiciary. President Joe Biden urged Israel in a statement not to rush increasingly divisive judicial reforms. Now, for more on the impending vote, we are being joined by Dr. Hadas Cohen. He is an Israel Institute teaching fellow at the University of Oklahoma. Welcome to the show. Now, what do the protesters want from the government?
Well, first of all, I'm a she, not a he. And the other thing is, what do the protesters want? Most of them want to stop this judicial overhaul that they're calling a coup. And what they are asking is that the government will stop trying to change the democratic rules, the democratic game. Because if this reasonability clause will be indeed changed, there will be no way to have oversight on government decisions and many different fronts. Now, these are what the protesters are saying. There are attempts to negotiate with the government of different bodies in Israel, starting from the Israeli president and then the head of the biggest union in Israel, Histadrut, that are saying, you know what, why don't we have a change of the reasonability clause, in other words, that the Supreme Court will still be able to have discretion over government decisions, but not on appointing ministers, which could be linked to the fact that there is an attempt to appoint Aryeh Deri, who was a minister who was convicted and found guilty of corruption charges. And he reached an agreement with the Israeli court with agreeing not to run to politics and not to try to have a political position. Now, there was an attempt to make him a minister because he is the head of one of the big parties that joined Netanyahu in his in this coalition, in this government. And if this reasonability, even if it will be modified, even if the most limited scope, he could still become a minister. So we see here a lot of interests that are starting from the people or the protesters, which represent the majority of Israeli citizens, and to different bodies and different sections in Israeli politics and economy that have different interests when it comes to this judicial overhaul.
What happens next?
What happens next? That's a really good question. We are right now on a very pivotal time. This afternoon, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, is supposed to vote on this and annulling the Supreme Court's ability to cancel, void government decisions if they are not reasonable. And right now there are Israeli citizens that have blocked houses of parliament members of the coalition that are supposed to go to the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament, and vote. And it really depends whether all of the members of the coalition will indeed vote for this annulling the reasonability clause or not. If this will happen, I'm not sure what will happen here. Are we going to have to see a mutiny? I mean, right now, Israeli pilots are refusing basically to go back to regular service. And so this makes Israel very vulnerable in terms of its military ability. I don't know what will happen. Nobody knows right now. This is a very stressful time here in Israel.
Absolutely. And Doctor, finally, why does Israeli parliament elections throw up such narrow margins every time?
Narrow margins between what? Between the two sides, or between what exactly?
Yeah, between the parties that are vying for power.
Well, it's not exactly that they have narrow margins in Israel. They have to form a coalition, and they have to be the coalition has to be greater than 60 members. So in other words, if one party, let's say the ultra-Orthodox, have about 20 seats. They got elected to have 20 seats. And then religious Zionism had about 13 seats. And then the Likud had about, I believe, 30 something or around 30 seats. They managed to reach 64 seats versus the 56 seats of the other side. And to pass laws, for most laws, they need a simple majority of 61 seats. So this narrow margin is not such a narrow margin. If you think about it right now, 4 is actually give them a huge margin, because if the opposition wants to not pass the law, they have to convince 4 coalition members for them not to vote for this, which is a lot. And I guess to go back directly to your question, Israel right now is we see here almost a civil war between the liberal fractions and the conservative religious fractions. I'm really wondering what will be the face of Israel, what will be the cultural and sociological makeup of Israel in 10 years, and whether we will still see the narrow margins, or we'll see basically a pull to the more religious and conservative side, just because they have much more children, every family.
Right. Doctor, thank you very much for your analysis and bringing us all the latest coming out of Israel.
Sure. Thank you. Have a good day.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.